Iran had promised harsh revenge, but not given the time frame. In the end, Operation Mata Soleimani, in retaliation for the assassination of its Quds general, came quickly in a salvo of missiles on air bases housing American forces in Iraq. Missiles launched from inside Iran struck two air bases in Erbil and Al-Assad, just west of Baghdad. Iran says 80 American terrorists were killed. But President Trump tweeted that all was well and said casualties and damage were being assessed. He'll make a statement at the White House later. But does this draw a line under hostilities going forward? Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen is in Baghdad.
Iran had been threatening severe retaliation, and the missiles were fired just after midnight. The Iranians seem to be trying to calibrate their response to satisfy fury at home and not to provoke President Trump into a particularly destructive military retaliation. The Iranian Foreign Minister, Javad Zarif, said in a tweet, that's the battleground for this diplomacy at the moment, that Iran's actions were rooted in international law, in Article 51 of the UN Charter, which deals with a state's right to self-defense. He seemed in that tweet to be trying to draw a line under retaliation. But then quite a different message came from Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader. He was speaking in Qom, a holy city in Iran, and he seemed to suggest that the night's attacks were not enough.
Revenge, that's something else. What happened last night was just a slap in the face. That's something else.
The Ayatollah said the corrupting presence of the United States had to be removed from the region. The crowd chanted, "God is greatest," and "Death to America." Even if this is the beginning of the end of the crisis caused by the assassination, the long-term conflict between Iran and the US continues to edge towards war, and that process won't stop without some kind of diplomacy leading to a political deal. There seemed to be one back in 2015 when they signed the Iran nuclear agreement, but President Trump pulled out of that a couple of years ago, and since then this crisis has grown and grown. There remains a really serious danger of war. This remains one of the world's most dangerous and unstable conflicts.
Jeremy Bowen, our Middle East editor, speaking to us from Baghdad. Well, in the past few hours, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has demanded, as we heard, the United States leave the Middle East. He had this to say about the attack itself.
Revenge, that's something else. What happened last night was just a slap in the face. That's something else.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Let's speak to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. As Jeremy was saying, Frank, I mean, slightly different messages coming from the supreme leader and from Iran's foreign minister. What are you reading to that?
Well, really, I think it's symptomatic of the two Irans. There is what I call the front of house, the fairly sort of emollient statements, relatively mild and moderate, coming from people like the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, who says, you know, we've concluded this, that let's draw a line on this, that's the end of it. But the deep state, the security, intelligence and revolutionary guards establishment in Iran, the hardliners, they're not going to let it rest there. What we've seen now is the end of phase one. This is the overt Iranian response. Very much for domestic consumption. There we've hit a slap in the face to America. We've punished them. The domestic narrative is that 80 Americans have been killed. I don't think anything like that is true. We haven't even heard of any casualties. But that isn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks and months, they will continue to harass and harry US forces in the region, not just in Iraq, but in other places as well. And the aim being to drive the US out of the wider Middle East, but particularly out of Iraq and Syria, clearing a way for a swathe of Iranian-dominated territory all the way from the Afghan border to the Mediterranean coast.
What's striking there, in the immediate aftermath, President Trump's tweet, pretty neutral, really. I mean, things seemed okay. You know, he's going to speak in a few hours' time. It's as if both sides are trying to keep a lid on this. I mean, is that your sense as well? I mean, is there any suggestion that America could have been tipped off about this?
There's no suggestion, but I think it's perfectly possible. I mean, it is extraordinary that 22 ballistic missiles, and these are powerful missiles, accurate as well, could be aimed directly at two bases housing coalition and, US and other forces, and yet there's not a single casualty reported. It's extraordinary. So if you look as well at the attack that took place in Saudi Arabia in September, 25 missiles, cruise and drones, hit precise bits of machinery in the Saudi oil refinery infrastructure that crippled that output, knocked out half the output in just the space of a few minutes. So when the Iranians want to do something, I mean, they denied that, they say it was the Houthis, but most experts say the Houthis weren't capable of doing that. When the Iranians want to do something, they're pretty accurate. They think very carefully about it. And remember that the Quds force that Qasem Soleimani commanded, this is their bread and butter. This is what they do. They are expert at covert operations and military operations, very carefully planned, often deniable, what's called black ops.
What should we read into the fact also that the hardlines of Revolutionary Guard have admitted being behind this? Because that is new, isn't it? Because normally this has all been played out in some sort of shadowy proxy fight.
I think there is an acceptance in Washington that given the massive impact that the killing of Qasem Soleimani has had on Iran and the huge crowds, the outpouring of not just grief but calls for vengeance that we saw, they had to do something pretty big and overt and say, yes, we've struck back at it. So yes, you're right, it's unusual, it's exceptional for them to do it. I don't think we're going to see, unless there is an American retaliation, I doubt we're going to see another overt Iranian attack, but we will see some mysterious attacks that properly have the hand of Iran behind them, but it's be hard to actually pin it to its door.
Okay, right. So Frank, for now, thank you very much indeed.